Kate Anderson sells her own blood, hiding the truth from her sick daughter, until Bernard Lewis, a billionaire and loner, witnesses her fainting backstage and decides to change their lives forever. But hope will come at a price no one imagined. Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Please like and subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories like this. The clock struck nearly midnight when the last chord echoed through the theatre. Kate Anderson, still seated at the center of the stage, let the bow of her cello rest gently on the strings. The silence was broken by the warm applause that filled every corner of that old performance house on Fifth Avenue. She wanted to smile, but felt a bitter pang when she realized her exhausted body could barely support her. Backstage, the stuffy air mixed the aromas of sweat, makeup powder, and cold coffee. Her steps were slow, her knees trembling from an inner strength that seemed to be gradually abandoning her. The black dress, ill-fitted to her already thin frame, snagged as she walked, matching the uncertain rhythm of her breath. When the world spun and the lights faded from her vision, the cold floor received her harshly. Kate fell without warning, unable to fight against the void pulling her down. The cello, her lifelong companion and struggle, rolled beside her, still echoing the last sound before the most absolute silence. On the other side of the stage, a figure watched. Bernard Lewis, with his grey eyes and perpetually distant expression, was not a man of grand gestures. The billionaire, known for his empire in mining and a loneliness that had become his only companion, saw the woman faint. Something in the scene broke his usual indifference. Papers scattered on the floor, sheets of receipts marked by blood donations. A secret of this unknown woman trying to preserve her daughter's life at any cost. Bernard approached, his firm steps contrasting with her fragility. He extended a hand with unexpected gentleness, helping her to sit up. There was a tone in his voice that did not match his usual cynicism. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked, observing Kate's pale face and the cold sweat on her forehead. She took a deep breath, trying to push away the mixed feelings of shame and fear. "Just a little lightheaded," she replied, her voice weak but firm enough not to reveal how fragile she felt inside. In that moment, the theatre stage ceased to be just a space for music. It became the setting where two divergent worlds met on the brink of inevitable change. The timid connection between the isolated businessman and the struggling mother hinted at a narrative that would transcend expectations of class, pain, and survival. Later, in her modest apartment in the Upper West Side, Kate gazed at her daughter with eyes full of love and concern. Melissa slept heavily, a result of her kidney treatment. Tubes and medications shaped their daily routine. The air was thick with the familiar scent of medicine and a faint aroma of chocolate truffles that Kate had made to try to coax a smile from the girl. She squeezed her daughter's tiny hand, something insisting she not abandon hope. But the truth was harsh. That silent battle came at too high a price, marked on the blood receipts she kept hidden as proof of the invisible sacrifice sustaining their lives. The phone vibrated with messages about bills, reminders for tests, and notifications from the pharmacy. Kate ignored it, setting the device aside. She couldn't let despair overflow at that moment. Meanwhile, Bernard returned to his vast office in the Gardens district. The large windows revealed the city that never sleeps, a New York composed of illuminated skyscrapers and streets filled with people with invisible stories. Sitting in his leather chair, he contemplated the reflection of his life, an existence guided by cold decisions, numbers, and strategies with no room for feelings. But the image of Kate fainting backstage lingered behind the tired eyelids of that man. There was something different, a new restlessness threatening to invade his controlled and impermeable routine. In the silence between reports and the bitter coffee burning his tongue, a question arose that would accompany him for days. How to help someone who silently fights against their own body? how to transform the distance between them into a path that made sense beyond social differences and past pains. Night fell over New York once again. The sounds of the city mingled with the whisper of a story ready to be written. The unlikely meeting of two souls marked by struggle and hope. And as the city pulsed to the disjointed rhythm of lives crossing without planning, Kate and Bernard were about to embark on a journey where pain would only be the beginning of something new, where love still needed to prove itself in the face of adversities that money could not buy. Nothing that night seemed to indicate that fainting backstage would be the starting point for a transformation that would forever change the destiny of these two very different and yet so connected people. It was the first chord of a symphony they would recognize as life, with all the dissonances and harmonies that the human journey brings with it. The following morning brought with it the shy sun that filtered through the tall windows of Lincoln Center. In the corridor where Kate usually prepared for concerts, framed by the echoes of strings and winds, a strange silence lingered. She avoided direct looks, stuffing her hands into the pockets of her worn coat, pretending to be distracted. She tried to forget the episode from the night before, denying her own body that insisted on complaining. When Bernard appeared, as if his intention was to cross the orchestra to greet the musicians, his steps were slow, almost calculated, but the focus was unmistakable. Kate, the billionaire, did not. He was a regular in that universe, and his presence there caused a silent stir. The aura of power that surrounded him seemed to envelop the space uncomfortably for many, but not for her. "I see you're holding strong today," he said, his voice laden with a dry humor that concealed genuine concern. Kate looked up, a bit surprised. She attempted a smile, instinctively wavering. "Strong is a generous word," she murmured, repositioning the bow on the strings of her cello. Silence followed like an invitation to unspoken words, a dance of glances that mixed understanding and reservations. Bernard leaned slightly, a gesture that contrasted with his imposing posture. "You don't have to torture yourself alone," he stated, almost without thinking. "I know people who work miracles with resources. You might need help." Those words sounded like thunder in her head. Kate had always prided herself on her independence, even though so much struggle succumbed to exhaustion. Accepting a helping hand was a dangerous step, a risk that wounded her pride. "Thank you," she replied firmly, but her voice betrayed her internal struggle. "But I know how to manage what is mine." "I don't need charity." Bernard smiled, a rare smile, devoid of joy but sincere. "It's not charity, it's recognition that we all have weaknesses, even those who seem too strong to fall." In the following days, Bernard's appearances among the rehearsals became constant. He circulated discreetly yet present, with personal comments and observations that seemed like small kindnesses. A coffee left in the dressing room, an invitation to a different concert, a gaze searching her face for signs of hidden fatigue. Kate, in turn, oscillated between irritation and curiosity. There was something disconcerting in the billionaire's gaze. He wanted nothing concrete, except perhaps, she found herself thinking, the friendship or something more complex that money couldn't buy. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows, creating golden mosaics on the wooden floor, Bernard appeared with an old copy of a score that reminded Kate of her childhood, both technical and personal, a legacy she kept in her cello case. "I found it at a fair," he commented, handing her the book. "I thought it might be useful." She touched the book, feeling the worn texture of the paper, a living memory that awakened hidden emotions. For a moment, the months of struggle and fear vanished, giving way to a sweet memory of a less cruel time. At that instant, a fork clattered to the floor with a loud crash in the rehearsal room, an interruption that broke the rising tension and revealed suppressed laughter. The tension between what must be and what wants to be made them almost palpable. As they conversed with the lightness that time had taught them, their eyes met with a different sparkle. The invisible barrier between their worlds began to dissolve, even amidst a sea of insecurities. Bernard, who was used to keeping everything under control, felt the discomfort of that vulnerability. His slow steps and the awkward way he approached her spoke more than he wanted to admit. "You're not alone," he said softly, as if revealing a secret. Kate took a deep breath, her chest tight with a mix of feelings. She thought she was resisting, but with him everything felt heavier yet lighter at the same time. And so, between the low chords of a song yet to be composed, she discovered that perhaps she could venture into a universe where she didn't have to carry the burden alone. A universe that showed that what unites hearts is not the shine of fortune, but the meeting of pains and hopes. No matter how hard she tried to hide behind laughter and the hustle of busy hours, her body began to give in more often. Bernard noticed her trembling hand, the gaze that insisted on hiding her fatigue. "Let me help," he insisted on one of those occasions, handing her a glass of water with a gentle smile. She hesitated but accepted. The brief contact of their hands sent a rush of warmth up the violinist's arm. An almost touch, almost a confession, interrupted by the distant sound of a woman's laughter from across the room. In that moment, Kate looked away, her heart pounding like a mismatched drum. Bernard felt the emptiness left by her hesitation, but he did not retreat. That game of approaching and barely concealed resistance was the prelude to something new, a fragile promise. In the orchestra, time seemed to flow differently now. No longer just mechanical chords of a hard routine, but pauses and glances, subtly charged with a tension that no one dared to name, but which grew like a symphony about to explode. Bernard, cold and calculating in the business world, began to feel the unpredictable effects of humanity. Kate, resilient and solitary, found in his silence an unsettling companionship and a hope that ached. And so, between gestures that spoke more than words and smiles that hid fears, the story of those two began its path. Slow, full of risks, but pulsing with a possibility that neither dared to name: love. Let's do an experiment. Those following this story, write "heartstruck" in the comments. Your participation is very important. The next morning, the air still carried the damp smell of the rain that had fallen overnight in New York City. In the modest apartment in the Upper West Side, Kate carefully arranged Emily's backpack for school. The girl's hands trembled slightly, a visible sign of the daily struggle they both faced, even as they tried to hide the harshness of reality behind a teenage smile. "I promise I'll be back earlier today, okay?" Kate said, her voice choked with the tightness in her chest as she opened the door to the bustling street. Emily nodded silently, her gaze fixed until the girl disappeared among the other students. Kate closed the door slowly, letting out a sigh that seemed to echo. Kate wanted to expel all the accumulated worries. The bills that kept piling up, the medical notices, the expensive tests that she couldn't always afford. Each step she took through the kitchen echoed in her weary soul, a silent reminder of the weight she carried without rest. Returning to the living room, she sat down in front of the cello, her fingers pressing down on the instrument. Her eyes caught the dim morning light filtering through the curtains, and in a momentary reflection she saw the phone vibrating in the corner of the table. An unknown message blinked on the screen. She hesitated, her mind filled with the events of the last few hours, but finally answered. The voice on the other end was deep and calm, different from anything she had expected. "Is this Kate Anderson? This is Bernard Lewis. I need to talk to you." For a moment, uncertainty took over. It wasn't common for a billionaire to call so directly. And yet, there was something in his voice that didn't allow for refusal. "Can it be in person?" she asked, even though she wasn't sure if she really wanted to expose herself. Bernard scheduled a meeting at an elegant cafe in the Upper East Side, a carefully chosen location to avoid exposure. yet still a comfortable environment, far removed from the harsh reality she lived. She arrived shortly after, wearing a simple t-shirt and worn jeans, contrasting with the elegance of the place. The muffled noise of customers, mixed with the strong aroma of freshly brewed coffee, created a curiously welcoming atmosphere. Bernard was waiting for her at a discreet table, maintaining the usual posture of someone in control of the situation, but with attentive eyes, searching for something beyond the surface. "Thank you for coming," he began with a restrained smile. "I know it's not easy for you to accept help from someone like me." Kate felt the heat rise to her face, uncomfortable in the recognition of the distance between the worlds they inhabited. "It's not a matter of accepting or not," she replied, trying to hide the insecurity in her firm voice. "It's about how not to lose dignity in the midst of all this." Bernard leaned forward, inching closer without invading her space. "I don't want you to feel indebted," he said sincerely. "I want to propose something different." There was a tense pause, as if waiting for permission to continue. "I need you to help me show that I can be more than the cold man my reputation insists on painting." He smiled, half ironically. "I need someone to teach me how to be real, close to people," he confessed, his tone becoming almost vulnerable. "Someone to help me understand that what we have on the outside is sometimes just armor." The impact of the proposal broke down Kate's defenses. She had never imagined being invited into that sophisticated life, so distant from her daily struggles. "And why me?" she asked, her gaze trying to convey all the disbelief she felt. "Because you are strong," Bernard replied with conviction, "strong and genuine, and because behind that strength I see a humanity that I still can't find. Perhaps together we can learn to be less alone." The silence that followed was filled with the distant clinking of cups and the murmuring of the staff, but in that corner of the cafe, the connection between two strangers seemed to accelerate time. Kate knew that accepting meant entering a risky game, where pride could be wounded and where money could be a double-edged sword. "It's not because I need it that I accept, Bernard," she finally said. "It's because I believe that sometimes, in order not to disappear, we need to trust." Bernard nodded, an unexpected sparkle in his eyes. Extending a contract, he explained, 6 months. You accompany me to events, meetings, help me learn to be more human. In exchange, I'll resolve your financial situation. No questions, no curiosities, just an agreement. The term agreement reverberated in Kate's mind as she repeated the word internally like a disconcerting mantra. Accepting wouldn't simply be a matter of money, but of dignity and deciding if hope was worth it. As she left the cafe, the city seemed different. The streets, the grey sky of New York gained colours invisible to the eyes, only perceived by hearts willing to risk the improbable. As she walked, the cold wind tossed her hair over her face, and even with fear tightening her chest, a faint spark of possibility pulsed within her. Bernard, watching from across the sidewalk, felt for the first time the weight of the responsibility he was assuming. This couldn't be resolved in spreadsheets or numbers, but in lives and emotions that no financial power could control. The clock marked the beginning of a pact that could save or destroy, but that would certainly change, forever. The story of two people learning that, amidst their differences, the true value lay in the courage to believe. If you're curious to know what will happen next, don't forget to leave your comment saying, "I want more," and share this story with your friends who love an exciting romance. The alarm clock rang insistently in the small apartment in the Upper West Side, bringing Kate back to the harsh reality she was trying to postpone, even if just for a moment. The morning air carried the light scent of freshly brewed coffee, an aroma that mixed hope and urgency. The bills piled up on the kitchen table seemed to represent an invisible but insurmountable barrier. In front of the package of medications and the sheets with test results, her gaze found the simplest details of the house. The faded curtain, the aged table, the old cello leaning in the corner, a silent witness to dreams that seemed increasingly distant. But there was something different that morning. The decision made in the cafe with Bernard, that promise of a 6-month pact, pulsed like a tight knot in her chest. Not out of despair, but from a faint flame of hope that she could barely trace amidst the fear. In the end, accepting the agreement was not just about accepting the money, it was about accepting that her life would change in ways she had yet to explore, that her pride could be hurt, but that perhaps, for the first time in a long time, she would allow herself to trust another human being to share the burden. As she put on the wrinkled t-shirt, Kate thought of Emily, the silent courage of that girl who, with a smile, hid the fears and insecurities of the difficult childhood they both faced. She needed to be strong more than ever. She needed to honor that agreement for the sake of her daughter, for her own sake. On the other side of the city, in an imposing building on Rodeo Drive, Bernard was preparing for the first formal chapter of that unlikely union. His office, entirely clad in glass and fine wood, reflected the sunlight flooding the space, but that morning brought a different tension. The tension of vulnerability, a territory he avoided navigating amidst the routine of negotiations and cold decisions. The sound of the phone, the ding of the elevator, every movement seemed to test more of the patience than the technique of that man used to controlling everything. But there, nothing seemed under his firm grip. There was a new urgency in the air, a responsibility that couldn't be resolved in balance sheets or financial contracts. When Kate entered the meeting room, with slightly hesitant yet determined steps, the contrast between them became almost palpable. Her simplicity, the subtle aroma of coffee and used books, her cautious posture and attentive gaze. He with his impeccably adjusted tie, the black suit that conferred power, but his eyes revealing a restlessness that no fabric seam could hide. They sat down, and Bernard spoke with an almost disarming sincerity. "I want you to know that this partnership is not a prison. If at any moment you feel uncomfortable, you can let me know. You are free to leave." Kate replied, with a firm voice that hinted at a world of secrets. "To me, it is hope. It's not just about money, but about the possibility of starting over." Days passed with the same speed as the bustling streets of the capital under the intense sun. Between the outskirts she knew and the luxury he dominated, Kate and Bernard navigated a succession of moments where their differences seemed at once insurmountable barriers and unexpected bridges. The socialite observing these encounters, characters from opposing worlds, could not comprehend what was happening between furtive glances and brief touches that spoke more than words shared over crystal glasses. Kate wore a borrowed blue dress for the first grand gala, where she was officially introduced as Bernard's companion. She still felt the new and difficult texture against her skin, the insecurity rising with every curious glance and discreet whisper. But there was also the strength that blossomed from that quick protective touch of Bernard's hand, the chill of sensitive palms pulsing under the pressure of the moment. Amidst rehearsed smiles and practiced conversations, the tension between them grew, creating a silent symphony, a prelude to a story they had yet to learn to tell. Returning home that night in the black, silent car, there was an unfamiliar comfort in the shared silence. But Bernard broke the tranquility with a heavy confession. "I'm afraid that even with all the control I have, I might lose what I want most, not the possessions, but myself." Kate found in him a rare vulnerability. She never imagined seeing the strong man she knew like this, stripped of his armor. "Fear is what makes us human," she replied honestly, as if sharing not just advice, but a piece of her own heart. The suspended moment between them was broken by the ringing phone, bringing back the weight of responsibilities they hadn't anticipated. As Bernard answered, Kate looked out the window, imagining that the contract that seemed to be just a business agreement carried much more within it. It was an invitation to take risks, to discover themselves. The life ahead promised to be a delicate dance between what was expected and what could be achieved. They both knew the path would be filled with challenges, secrets kept in silence, doubts that would test their limits. But there was one certainty. Sometimes the greatest risk is opening the door for the other to enter, even when fear insists on shouting to keep it closed. Now they just needed to find the courage to dance to the sound of that new symphony. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from, and rate this part of the story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is essential for us to follow this journey together. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming chapters of this emotional and twist-filled plot. The days that followed the first official meeting marked the beginning of a routine that challenged both to step out of their comfort zones. Kate, who until then had been moving between exhausting shifts and caring for Emily, began to organize her life around the events that Bernard demanded. Business dinners, gallery openings, social gatherings, where she needed to learn to be nothing more than what he expected to see. That morning, as the sun filtered its yellow glow through the windows of the modest apartment, Kate carefully chose a blue silk blouse, a forgotten gift from an old friend. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she felt her heart racing, her skin marked by an anxiety that was more about facing the unknown than just about her appearance. She tried to mentally repeat the names of the attendees at that night's event, their titles, their relationships with Bernard, a list that felt more like a treasure map to a world that was foreign to her. Deep down, she felt like an imposter, battling the fear of being unmasked at any moment. Bernard, in his glass-walled office, reviewed the preparations for the same occasion. His hands, accustomed to going through cold reports, now trembled slightly as he thought about the company he would bring to that world, filled with scrutinizing gazes. Not that he needed to prove anything to anyone, at least that's what he kept telling himself, but there was tremendous importance in maintaining the image that money could buy. When they met in the parking lot of the building, the air was charged with an electricity imperceptible to others. Bernard helped her settle into the passenger seat with a care that contrasted with his usual distant demeanor. The scent of lavender from the car diffuser mingled with the smell of leather, while silence filled the space with an uncomfortable intimacy for both. During the drive, Bernard dared to break the silence. "Are you managing to adapt?" Kate looked away, watching the reflection of the buildings whiz by. "It's not easy," she replied, her voice low. "But each day is a victory." He gave a restrained half-smile. "In the end, we learn that life is a big improvisation." Upon arriving at the venue, they were swallowed by a sea of elegantly dressed people, measured smiles, and choreographed conversations. Kate felt the weight of her dress, her shoes, and the expectations. Her dry mouth tried to smile, while her eyes scanned the environment in search of an anchor point that would make her feel at ease, but everything seemed distant, cold. Bernard introduced her to his colleagues, sometimes with a subtle touch on the arm, sometimes with a formal greeting. The distance maintained between them was a thin line oscillating between professionalism and something almost unspoken. His voice was confident, but his attention seemed to latch onto her slightest signals, trying to decipher what she wasn't saying. During dinner, a guest, an important investor whom Bernard was trying to impress, asked, "And this is your date?" Looking at Kate with a raised eyebrow, Bernard responded with a smile that carried a hint of challenge. "Exactly." The investor's gaze faltered for a second before yielding to a respectful nod. The night continued, filled with dialogues where clear words hid different intentions, and glances carried meanings that escaped strangers. Kate felt Bernard's eyes on her, a complex mix of protection, judgment, and something undefined, as if every movement she made held more weight than she realized. Later, after dinner, already in the car that would take them back, Kate let out a deep sigh, a mix of relief and exhaustion. "It's a life different from mine," she said, her gaze fixed on the fog beginning to settle over the city. "And yet, I feel there are parts of me that refuse to disappear." Bernard turned to her, his eyes shining with a sincerity that surprised Kate. "That, perhaps, is the most beautiful thing. You are bringing yourself to a place where no one expected you to fit." She bit her lip, trying to hold back her emotions. "And you? What are you bringing?" He hesitated, the silence between them now heavier. Perhaps the courage to let someone in. That night, when they arrived at Kate's apartment, Emily hugged her tightly, as if sensing the changes ahead. Kate looked at Bernard, who watched with a faint smile. "Thank you," she murmured almost to herself. Bernard nodded, understanding that this thank you carried more than gratitude. It was the acknowledgement that this pact was more than business. It was a chance for both of them to reconnect. Before leaving, he turned one last time, caught by hesitation. "Kate, I know this isn't an easy path, but I want you to know that I'm here. Not just out of obligation, but because I want to try." She crossed her arms, vulnerability mixed with pride. "I don't expect anything easy, Bernard. I just hope that we don't lose ourselves in the midst of all this." He smiled, his eyes revealing a silent promise. "We won't." As the door closed behind him, Kate sat for a moment, allowing the silence to envelop her. Amid the muffled sounds of the street and Emily's calm breathing, she felt the urgency and delicacy of the pact they had made transform into something alive, tangible, an invisible thread beginning to weave their story. The future was uncertain, but at that moment courage was the only certainty. Tell us in the comments from which city you are watching and rate this part of the story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is essential for us to follow this journey together. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming chapters of this emotional and twist-filled plot. The next morning arrived wrapped in a thin mist that seemed to carry the doubts and hopes of sleepless nights. Kate woke up before the alarm, her body still marked by the accumulated fatigue of the past few days, but with a restless heart filled with a new feeling, the expectation of the unexpected. The dim light entering through the window illuminated the outline of the room, where scattered toys and borrowed books from the hospital composed the scene of a simple life, yet full of dreams kept in the soul. While preparing coffee in the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the sweet scent coming from the cornbread made by Emily the night before, an innocent gesture that brought comfort in the most uncertain moments. Her fingers brushed the cup, feeling the transient warmth, just as she felt the warmth of the responsibility she carried. That silent pact, she still didn't know whether it saved her or imprisoned her. At the same moment, Bernard faced a turbulent morning at the office. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, as emails and meetings multiplied in an unyielding choreography of decisions involving million-dollar investments, market strategies, and a complex web of interests that allowed no weaknesses. However, amidst the pressure, his thoughts drifted to Kate, the woman who, against all his expectations, was beginning to stir his deepest feelings. During the afternoon, Bernard received an unexpected call. It was his sister Sarah, a sweet yet firm voice, carrying the usual burden of family concern. She questioned her brother's decision to get involved with someone so far removed from his social circle. "Bernard, you need to think about the consequences," warned Sarah, her voice trembling behind her composure. "You can't mix business and feelings like this, especially with someone who doesn't understand our world." Bernard hesitated, the tip of the phone brushing his fingers as Sarah's words echoed in his mind. He knew his sister's opinion came from a place of care, but it also carried the weight of the prejudices he himself struggled to overcome. "Sarah, I don't want it to be just business. I want to try something different," he said, his voice softer than usual. The silence on the other end spoke more than any response, leaving space for doubt and also for possibility. Meanwhile, Kate was receiving bitter news at the hospital. Emily needed an urgent and expensive test, something that, even with the money from the settlement, was stretching her budget thin. The nurse felt the knot in her throat and the tear that insisted on escaping, but she took a deep breath, reminding herself of the strength that had brought her this far. That night, when Bernard unexpectedly found some free time, he decided to pay a visit. He found Kate in her small apartment, surrounded by books, medications, and the little girl sleeping with a serene smile, oblivious to the storms surrounding that home. They sat at the simple table, comfortable silence filling the space before Bernard broke it with a simple yet profound question. "How are you holding all of this together?" Kate stirred her spoon in the coffee, avoiding his gaze for a moment. "I do what I can," she replied, "but there are days when hope feels very far away." Bernard observed her tired expression, and in an impulse that surprised them both, he took her hand, his warm fingers gripping hers firmly, almost as if he wanted to transmit some of the strength he felt was lacking. "You're not alone," he said, his voice hoarse. "You can count on me." The gesture opened a crack in the fortress Kate had built. Tears came softly, sliding down her face as she rested her head on his shoulder, accepting in that moment the vulnerability of someone who needs support. The moment was interrupted by the doorbell. Emily, sleepy, opened the door and was surprised to see Bernard there. The girl's shy smile acknowledged the gesture and ignited a light in Kate's heart that she no longer knew was relief, fear, or the beginning of something more. That night, as Bernard returned to his apartment, he reflected on the dilemmas that a contract on paper could never foresee. It was not simply a contract, but an intertwining of lives that required courage to face insecurities, boundaries, and the real possibility of finding something unexpected, perhaps love, amidst so many contrasts. They both knew that the road ahead would not be easy, filled with challenges both internal and external. But that silent promise shared in the touch of their hands was like an anchor, holding them steady even in the face of the storms to come. As the city slept, New York breathed calmly under the veil of night, holding stories that only those willing to take risks could live in all their intensity. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from, and rate this part of the story from 0 to 10. Your words are essential for this plot to reach more hearts. Leave your like and subscribe so we can together unravel the next chapters of this exciting journey. The first light of morning filtered through the windows of Kate's apartment, casting golden stripes that danced over the worn walls and modest furniture. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the small space, contrasting with the silence punctuated by Emily's calm breathing, still wrapped in the sheets. Kate felt the weight of sleep slowly dissolve, but she also carried an unease that wouldn't let her rest completely. Her recent encounters with Bernard had opened a door to a new world, where expectations and fears mingled in a delicate dance. She slowly got up, cracking her fingers to shake off the morning chill, and walked to the kitchen. As she prepared her daughter's coffee, her mind wandered back to the conversations from the previous night. The silent promise she had shared with Bernard, the touch of their hands that seemed to carry the fragility and strength of a bond that was both delicate and real. The fear that everything could crumble was always lurking, but hope had never felt so tangible. At the business center where Bernard had his office, the morning began bustling. He walked through the glass and steel corridors, surrounded by urgent voices and decisions that defined futures, businesses, and reputations. But despite the seemingly unshakable routine, something had changed within him. He was paying more attention to the little things, to the shy smile that Kate tried to hide at events, to the way her doubts echoed his own uncertainties. A phone call interrupted him at noon. It was his father, the man who had always represented authority and pressure, and who never held back on criticizing his son's choices. "Bernard, your mother and I are worried. This relationship is bringing more complications than solutions. You need to focus on what really matters." His words were firm, laden with a rigidity that it felt like embracing a trap. Bernard knew he couldn't simply ignore the voice of the past, especially when it came laden with expectations and fears. But the thought of giving up what he was beginning to build with Kate hurt more than any reprimand. "Dad, this isn't just about business." "It's more than that," he replied with restrained firmness. On the other end of the line, there was a long silence before a resigned sigh. Meanwhile, Kate faced a new challenge. The hospital had summoned her for an urgent meeting about potential cuts in her department, which could further complicate the family's stability. Fear tightened again, momentarily crushing the flame of hope she'd been trying to keep alive. Throughout that day, while talking to colleagues and friends, she realized how the world presented to Bernard was far from her own, divided by invisible walls of class and culture. She felt the weight of those barriers with every forced smile at gala events, with every glance that seemed to evaluate her presence as an anomaly. On one of those nights, during an unexpected visit to a client's penthouse, Kate and Bernard found themselves side by side on a balcony overlooking the illuminated Fifth Avenue. Under the starry sky, the city pulsed with life, a mix of distant noise, lights, and aromas of the metropolis intertwining. Kate took a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze on her face, while Bernard gazed at the horizon. "Do you think you can keep going in this life?" he asked, almost in a whisper, without taking his eyes off the vastness. She turned to him, her gaze steady despite the fatigue. "I don't know, but I know I can't give up now. There's too much at stake. Much more than I imagined at the beginning." Bernard shrugged, a simple gesture that hid an internal storm. "I don't know where this will lead either, but I wish we could figure it out together." The closeness of their bodies, the shared breaths, the silence heavy with unexpressed feelings created a moment of almost palpable tension. Bernard reached out his hand, which she accepted with a gentle squeeze. However, just as they were about to let themselves be carried away by the moment, Bernard's phone rang sharply, breaking the atmosphere. "Sorry," he said, visibly frustrated. "The real world is calling me." The interruption separated them like a wave pulling boats away from the shore. In that instant, both understood that the dance between their worlds would still be marked by hesitant steps, postponed meetings, and the constant battle between the heart and external demands. But despite the difficulties, the seed of feeling growing between them needed to be nurtured, and even amidst uncertainties, the commitment to try remained strong. As Bernard whispered inaudible promises and Kate sipped the last drop of coffee, each in their respective worlds, the invisible thread that connected them gained strength, paving the way for a journey that was just beginning. We would love to hear your opinion. Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from, and rate this part of the story from 0 to 10. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to dive even deeper into this plot full of emotions, challenges, and twists that are just beginning. The orange light of dusk spilled over Fifth Avenue, tinting the glass and concrete buildings with warm hues that seemed to soften the impersonal nature of the metropolis. Kate walked along the bustling sidewalks, her hurried steps trying to escape the anxiety that grew like a slow-burning fire within her chest. In her hands, the crumpled note that Bernard had given her hours earlier, with a timid invitation for a dinner outside the official schedule, a small gesture. But for her, it carried the weight of a silent revolution. In a cozy restaurant in the Upper East Side, under lighting that played on the crystal glasses and wooden details, Bernard awaited her. The aroma of fresh garlic, herbs, and freshly brewed coffee enveloped the space, a harmony of senses that, for Kate, translated the delicacy of that night unfolding away from corporate spotlights. He stood up as he saw her enter, his eyes capturing every detail of the simple dress she had chosen, the sincere smile illuminating her tired face. The approach was discreet, almost hesitant, as if they both still resisted making real what was becoming a promise with each meeting. "You made it," he said in a low voice, a mix of surprise and relief. I thought after everything you might back out." Kate smiled, a smile that held a mix of insecurity and courage. "Back out? No way. I just wanted a moment to breathe something different from the daily grind." They sat close, their chairs almost touching, and the proximity sparked an electricity that was hard to disguise. As the waiter brought the menu, Bernard's eyes searched hers, trying to find the words he still dared not say. "You know, Kate, sometimes I wonder if all of this is worth it," he began, gesturing to the dim neon outside, to the city that pulsed incessantly. "This race, this pressure, and here we are, trying to make something work that wasn't part of the original plan." She tilted her head, absorbing the confessions he had kept as secrets until now. The touch of his hand on the table brought warmth, a silent invitation for her to open up as well. "I know the world you live in is different from mine," she replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. "But I don't want that to paralyze us. I want this to be a beginning, even if it's full of stumbles." For a moment, the sounds of the restaurant, the muffled conversations at other tables, the clinking of cutlery, faded away, in the face of the intimacy forming there, in that small island of sincerity. Bernard gazed at their intertwined hands, a burning desire to touch, to protect. Kate knew she had to change everything so that she wouldn't have to suffer the consequences of the inequalities that separated them. "What if all of this is an illusion?" she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "What if we end up hurt, like so many times before?" Kate lifted her gaze, determined not to flee from the shadow that threatened them. "I have been hurt before, and I know I can rise again. But for that, I need to believe," she asserted with a courage that only love can lend. The dinner continued, with conversations that floated between light and serious, maintaining the vibrant subtext of an uncertain yet possible future. In the end, Bernard offered to walk her to her car, a gesture of care that revealed more than words could express. On the way, the shared silence gained meaning. Their bodies aligned in the passenger seat created a tension that made the air vibrate. Breaths quickened, stolen glances exchanged. When they stopped in front of Kate's building, Bernard finally broke the silence. "You are different from anyone I've ever met, Kate. And I don't know what that means for me yet, but I want to try to find out," he said, his voice heavy with rare sincerity. She smiled, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. "I want that too, even if the path isn't easy." Before getting out of the car, he leaned down for a soft kiss, a meeting that was almost interrupted by a group of residents passing by, their laughter now louder. The forced distance made their gazes linger, filled with promise and hesitation. Kate stood there, watching the red light reflected in the glass, feeling that this small victory was a battle against the fears that always threatened her heart. Upon entering the building, the familiar aroma of fresh coffee met her senses again, reminding her that despite the gala nights and unexpected gestures, her daily struggle continued, and that perhaps, with Bernard, she could learn to be strong for two. Inside the apartment, Emily awaited her with a tight hug, as if she knew that the world around them was beginning to transform. Kate closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself a sigh of relief and hope. The night in New York City sparkled, a witness to the intertwined stories of those who risk their hearts against all odds. Stay with us, and let us know in the comments which city you are watching from, and rate this part of the story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is important for us to continue bringing unique and exciting moments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any twists in this passionate journey. The next morning dawned over New York City with a sky heavy with grey clouds, announcing a light drizzle that seeped into the corners of the city. Kate woke to the distant sound of cars and the buzz of the street, feeling in her body the mix of restlessness and lightness left by the previous night. Bernard's touch still pulsed on her skin, a reminder that warmed and, at the same time, challenged the walls of her own insecurity. In the kitchen, the smell of coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of the breads that Emily was trying to bake with almost childlike dedication. The girls' light laughter filled the space, like a balm for the heavy hours that had accumulated. Kate watched the scene with a shy smile, aware that despite the world threatening to close around her, there were still moments worth living. However, an unexpected phone call broke the calm. It was from the hospital, an urgent call for a meeting about the possibility of staff reductions, a topic that had become a constant spectre in her routine. Her heart tightened with the news that was increasingly becoming a real threat to the stability she fought to build. As she prepared to leave, a message from Bernard lit up her phone screen. "Can I come by after work? We need to talk." The combination of worry and anticipation sent shivers down Kate's spine, and she quickly replied with a simple yes. The day unfolded slowly, as if time conspired to increase the weight of obstacles and the intensity of emotions. At the office, Bernard faced growing pressure from the partners, who looked at his shift in focus and personal involvement with skepticism. His father's voice, still present in his memory, echoed as a reminder of the world he was trapped in. By the end of the afternoon, he drove to the small apartment where, upon crossing the threshold, he was greeted by the familiar smell of coffee and the warm light of the half-drawn curtains. Kate was sitting at the kitchen table, her expression serious, her eyes trying to find courage in his gaze. "They want to cut more staff," she said bluntly, "and my department is one of the most threatened." Bernard sat down, gently holding her hands, as if he could transfer the strength she lacked. "We are at a crossroads we didn't choose," he murmured, "but we will face this together. You are not alone." The warmth of those words made Kate feel a wave of confidence forming, even as reality insisted on weakening her foundations. She glanced at the bedroom, where Emily was calmly drawing, oblivious to the adult world's turbulence around her. "For her, for you, for me, we have to fight," she said firmly. The conversation shifted to more personal topics, where doubts, fears, and dreams were shared without reservation. Bernard revealed facets of vulnerability that had never emerged in his boardroom. Kate showed the strength that only those who carry silent responsibilities possess. Meanwhile, night fell, painting the city in shades of purple and silver. In the silence of the apartment, Kate's deep sigh mixed hope and exhaustion, the certainty that the road would be tough, but that for the first time in a long time, she was not walking alone. Before Bernard left, he stood there, contemplating her tired yet determined expression, aware that their union was as fragile as it was necessary, a tenuous bridge between two worlds that insisted on colliding. In the hallway of the building, they heard raised voices, a dispute between neighbors about noise and schedules, a harsh reminder that Kate's simple life carried real and everyday problems, so far removed from the luxuries Bernard knew. A contrast that not only separated them, but also, in some way, united them in understanding the invisible battles. As they said goodbye with a tight embrace, laden with silent promises, both knew that despite the social, economic, and emotional obstacles, they were beginning to write a story that no one could predict. New York City continued to pulse outside, relentless and full of surprises, ready to witness the intertwining of lives that dared to rewrite their own destinies. Now, we want to hear your opinion. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this part of the story from 0 to 10. Your participation is essential for us to continue bringing intense and exciting chapters. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any details of this adventure filled with love, challenges, and courageous decisions. The grey sky of New York City seemed a mirror of the internal turmoil that engulfed Kate that morning. As she carefully braided Emily's hair, the news from the previous night still echoed in her mind. More layoffs, more uncertainties, a future that stubbornly refused to take shape in anything but thick shadows. The fine drizzle seeped through the cracks of the slightly open window, mingling with the comfortable silence of the kitchen, where the warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee contrasted with the invisible tension hanging in the air. Emily, still sleepy, asked simple questions about school, drawings, and small childhood dreams, but Kate knew she needed to find the strength to respond lightly, to hide a bit of the fatigue that overwhelmed her, and to show her daughter that, despite everything, life would go on, even if it meant fighting for every step. Finishing up the backpacks for school, Kate felt her phone vibrate. A message from Bernard. Just 2 words. "Talk today?" The invitation, despite its simplicity, carried a weight that squeezed her chest. She replied impulsively, "Whenever you want." On the way to Bernard's office, the city displayed its most contrasting facets. Amid the chaotic traffic, crowded street fairs, and vendors vying for attention, the streets were dominated by imposing buildings and luxury shops. It was as if the worlds that she and Bernard occupied were separated by a thin, almost invisible line, but impossible to ignore. When they finally arrived at the private room, the air-conditioned environment decorated with elegant minimalism felt like an oasis far removed from Kate's tumultuous life. Bernard closed the door with a sigh, and the weight of that moment fell heavily upon them. "We need to be honest, Kate," he began, his voice heavy with concern and a touch of exhaustion. "My family is pressuring me to prioritize the business again, especially with the shareholder meeting approaching. They won't accept this relationship interfering with the results, or that I get distracted from the path they expected me to follow." Kate felt a knot form in her stomach. That revelation, expected yet no less painful, showed that the price of choice would be even greater than she imagined. "And what do you want?" she asked with trembling courage. Bernard looked away. A dense silence settled in. "I want to try. I want to bet on what we are building, even not knowing where it will lead. But I know that for this, we will have to face resistance, even within my own home." She ran her hand over her face, feeling the weight of the responsibility not only on her, but on him as well. A world of privileges that demanded enormous sacrifices, restrictions that felt like bricks erected around what they desired. "I don't know if I'm ready for these battles," Kate admitted, her voice almost faltering, "but I also can't deny what I feel anymore. For me, it's already too late to give up." Bernard stepped closer, extending his hand. She took it as if it were a lifeline in the midst of a stormy sea. At that moment, amidst the tension of the confrontations awaiting them, a decision was made, tacit yet firm. They would fight, side by side, even if the path was uncertain and fraught with traps. The next meeting, days later, would be the turning point, a cruel test that would involve not only the future of the Lewis family's business, but also the fate of that love in the making, which stubbornly sought to break down the barriers of class, prejudice, and fear. As Bernard planned the words to be used, preparing to face the clan's opinions, Kate prepared to resist the chill of rejection and the shadow of doubt, as if she were donning an invisible shield against the storms to come. That night, as the city lit up in cold neon hues and the rain began to patter against the windows, they both faced their reflections in the glass, each of their own eyes carrying a universe of fears and hopes. They knew the stakes were high, risky, and uncertain, but the flame they had ignited together, however faint it seemed, they would not let it extinguish so easily. "Life, after all," Bernard murmured, "is made of these battles, and I won't give up on ours." New York City, with all its contradictions, would witness every step of this journey that refused to be just another ordinary story. We would love to know what you think. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from, and rate this part of the plot from 0 to 10. Your opinion is crucial for us to continue delivering chapters full of emotion and realism. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow each challenge. And every achievement in this story is just beginning. The meeting at the Lewis mansion started with a chilly atmosphere worthy of the imposing boardroom in the family headquarters, where mahogany panels gleamed under the crystal chandelier, reflecting the tension that hung in the air. Bernard entered alongside Kate, feeling the weight of the partners' gazes, who, disguising their curiosity with sharp looks, measured every gesture, every word, as if they were saying in their minds, "Are you ready for this?" Kate, in her simple blouse and hair tied up in a delicate bun, contrasted with the impersonal and sophisticated environment. However, her eyes radiated an unexpected determination for many present. The murmur of the attendees ceased when Bernard opened the meeting, his voice firm despite the anxiety he suppressed. "I want to introduce you to someone who has been fundamental in my life and represents a change we need to embrace," he said, casting a careful glance at Kate. "Someone who made me reconsider priorities and look to the future." The shareholders exchanged skeptical glances. The patriarch of the Lewis family, a man with icy eyes and a marked New York accent, did not hide his deep frown. "Bernard, I don't know what you're talking about. Many here work for the future of the company, not for personal distractions." He cut in, his voice harsh and cutting. Kate felt a chill, but she held her nails firmly as they began to dig into her palm. Bernard raised his hand, asking for silence. "I understand the concerns. The company is important to all of us. But part of the future involves innovation, inclusion, and understanding the social and economic changes in the country. Kate showed me that there's a side we cannot ignore or relegate just because of tradition," he explained, and his eyes sparkled with a conviction that surprised many. She took a deep breath and introduced herself, her voice filling the room. "I am a woman who knows the streets and the battles that many people face every day. I come from a different world, but I believe that if we join forces, we can create solutions that benefit not only the company, but the very city we live in," she asserted, her words heavy with the weight of experience. One of the partners, a woman with a stern face, crossed her arms and retorted, "And what exactly do you intend to do here, Kate? We are not in a social work environment." "I did not come to change anyone's job," she replied firmly, her tone strong yet respectful. "I want to bring a vision that represents real consumers, workers, and the communities where this company operates. The country only grows if we grow together, and that includes the diversity of experiences." Bernard smiled discreetly. With a gesture, he reinforced his arguments. The meeting turned into a battle of ideas, where Kate defended each word with the passion of someone who carries a life of silent challenges, while the Lewises resisted between ultra-conservatism and the fear of the new. In the end, a formal vote decided to give the proposed project a chance, but with strict conditions, tight deadlines, aggressive goals, and constant oversight. A big test, perhaps cruel, but at the same time representing a step, even if small, towards change. As they left the room, the silent glances revealed the extent of the impact that afternoon had caused. Kate felt her legs trembling, but Bernard held her hand firmly, transmitting strength. "We took a step," he whispered in her ear, his fingers intertwined with hers. "Small steps are also victories," she replied, trying to contain her choked voice. The return home was filled with mixed emotions. The rain began to fall slowly over the city again, washing the streets and invisibly crafting a new chapter in both their journeys. Upon arriving, Emily ran to Kate, hugging her. The girl, with her bright smile, both a title and a hope, dissipated the fatigue of the seemingly endless day. Bernard, observing that scene, felt a simple and raw truth. Fighting against the world would never be easy, but loving someone like Kate, who faced every challenge with courage, was a privilege that made him want to be better. Later, in that comfortable silence, Kate took his hand and softly said, "Thank you for not giving up. The road is tough, but with you, maybe it will be less lonely." He pulled her close, the embrace firm and warm, driving away the shadows, even if just for now. New York City continued out there, pulsing, unpredictable, ready to be the stage for the love and battles that were just beginning. Now we really want to know, from which city are you watching? Rate this part of the story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your opinion is essential for us to continue creating this plot full of life and emotion. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel to follow every step of this journey as real as it is inspiring. The clock struck almost midnight when Bernard finally left the office, the weight of the day still heavy on his broad shoulders. The routine of meetings, demands, and judgmental looks seemed endless, but that night there was a glimmer of hope pulsing against defeat. As he drove through the wet streets of New York City, the city seemed to resonate with the rhythm of the falling rain, a discreet symphony that cradled his thoughts. Upon arriving at Kate's apartment, the door opened before he could even ring the bell. Emily, with her tousled curls and plaid pajamas, ran to him, flashing a smile that lit up like a beacon. "Aunt Kate said you're nice," the girl said, pulling him by the hand into the softly lit living room by a yellow lamp. Bernard smiled, the rigidity giving way to warmth. He kissed the girl's forehead, feeling the lightness that only innocence could bring. Kate appeared wearing an old sweatshirt, her eyes still marked by the intense day, but shining in a different way, as if she were drawing strength from barren soil. "It was late," she said, welcoming him with a hug that tasted of a battle won, albeit temporarily. "Yes," he replied, pulling her close, the familiar scent of coffee with cinnamon filling the air between them. "But I got what we wanted. A small step, but a step." Kate sighed, her fingers intertwined with his, anchors against the storm they knew was coming. "Tomorrow begins the real test," she said, her voice low, "not just for the project, but for us." Bernard tilted his head, resting his forehead against hers, the chill of New York City seeping through the cracks of the window as they found themselves in the midst of comfortable silence. "We can't let fear define our story." The next day, messages began to arrive, whispers in the corporate air and at the heart of social media. The project, with Kate as the face of renewal, generated as much enthusiasm as resistance. Comments mixed admiration and prejudice, a mirror of the divisions that extended beyond the luxurious boardrooms. Kate was forced to deal with the wary gazes of old colleagues, fearing that her rise might be merely a result of her closeness to Bernard. The heavy stares should have been ignored, yet they hammered away, testing her newly discovered strength. Meanwhile, Bernard faced familial ghosts. Terse phone calls from his sister, subtle criticisms from his father, and an increasingly cold atmosphere in social interactions. The pressure to maintain appearances clashed with the true desire that pulsed within. On a particularly difficult night, Kate walked through the narrow streets of the neighborhood where she grew up, a labyrinth of stories and memories where the scent of hot empanadas and brewed coffee mingled in the breeze. The sound of lively conversations from the bars contrasted with the loneliness she felt, a bittersweet sensation that made her question her place in this game. When Bernard found her sitting on a bench in front of a quiet square, her tired expression and eyes that had lost some of their sparkle, he approached slowly. "You're not alone," he said, sitting beside her, his fingers brushing her skin like a protective caress. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth she needed to face the cold of doubt. "But sometimes it hurts so much that I'm afraid I won't be able to keep going," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Then let's take it one day at a time," he replied, smiling gently, "however we need to." In that moment, the city, with its lights and shadows, seemed to calm just for them. It was the space between the storm and the calm, where love manifested not in grandeur, but in everyday resilience. Each call, each difficult meeting, each disparity of worlds did not erase what they were building there. Fragments of a future that required courage and boldness to be envisioned. The next morning, Kate received the news that the project had moved to the next phase of analysis, a triumph that came with an even greater weight of responsibility. But she smiled, aware that this was just the first step on the ladder she needed to climb. Bernard, for his part, felt torn between pride and the silent anger that society placed upon them. However, in moments of insecurity, he found in Kate the strength to withstand the storms. That night, they met at a small traditional bakery in Greenwich Village, where the sweet smell of chocolate truffles enveloped the atmosphere, and the music in the background was an invitation to breathe and dream. "You know, I never thought an unexpected meeting could turn into this beautiful and maddening chaos," Kate said, throwing a light laugh into the air. Bernard took her hand across the table, the warmth of contact dissipating doubts. "Neither did I. But if it's to walk with you, let everything come," he asserted with conviction. Time taught them that love, when mixed with social battles and differences of worlds, required something more than passion. It demanded courage to resist, learn, and reinvent. And so, in the melancholies and joys of New York City, they continued to build a story that escaped the conventional script, where silence carried promises, and each step taken was an affirmation of life. And you, are you enjoying it? Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from, and give a rating from 0 to 10 for this part of the plot. Your opinion is essential for us to keep bringing real, intense, and emotional stories. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to continue following this passionate journey. Time, relentless and generous, continued to draw its lines on the lives of Kate and Bernard, challenging them to find strength in the fissures of their own certainties. The present intertwined with the past and the uncertain future, each moment laden with the silent urgency that only those who fight know how to recognize. On that grey morning, the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled Kate's small apartment. She was organizing the project documents, manuals, and reports alongside Emily, who was finishing packing her backpack for school. The rhythmic noise of footsteps on the street, the distant clinking of bicycles, the whisper of the wind among the trees on the sidewalk formed the soundtrack of that routine, which was an intertwining of worlds. An unexpected call interrupted Kate's concentration. The unidentified number flashed on her cell phone screen like an invitation or a warning. She answered cautiously, the warmth of the voice on the other end accompanied by unsettling news. "Kate, this is Robert from the board. We need to talk." Her heart raced, a foreboding. It was earlier than she had expected for the demands and warnings, a reminder that the support gained in the last meeting could vanish in an instant. "I'm listening, Robert." The preliminary analysis of the project revealed some technical flaws, and there are doubts about the financial impact. We need an urgent overhaul. And of course, I wanted to know how you're doing. Kate held her breath, feeling the familiar pressure tighten her chest. "We are working hard to address every point, Robert. I know the deadlines are tight, but I assure you we will have a revised report by the end of the week." "Great, Kate. We hope you can manage," he replied, his voice a mix of expectation and a hint of skepticism. Hanging up, she stared at the worn fabric of the desk, feeling her fingers tingle. Each challenge seemed to multiply, but retreat had never been an option. Bernard called her later for an urgent meeting at the office. The modern hallways of the building echoed with their footsteps as he waited for her, impatient. His gaze carried tension, those dark eyes pulsing with a mix of frustration and hope. "We need to talk," he said, pulling her into a private room. "The board has increased their resistance. It won't be easy to sustain the project if we don't show results faster, and—" He paused, biting his lip. "What they're saying out there isn't helping." Kate frowned. She knew the shadow he mentioned. The press was starting to question the project, with words laden with prejudice and fear, utopian idealism, masked political interference, headlines that echoed with disdain among conservative business people. "We have to be prepared for a fight," she replied, her voice firm despite the fear she hid. "But we won't back down. Every word they throw at us will be an invitation to show that we are here to stay." Bernard looked at her with admiration, her fervor igniting the little that still resisted pessimism. "That's why I want you by my side at the next assembly. It's time to show the strength of this work." In the weeks that followed, their schedules became a frantic dance of meetings, presentations, and constant evaluations. Kate dove into reports, scoured data, sought support networks, and forged alliances that had once seemed impossible. Bernard, in turn, faced social isolation, veiled criticism, and increasingly intense family pressure. Phone conversations with his father became brief and cold. His forced smile, almost a mask to hide his vulnerability. On one of those difficult nights, when everything seemed to be crumbling, Kate received an urgent message. Her mother had been hospitalized. The phone trembled in her hands as she tried to control her tears and prepare whatever was necessary to support the one who had always been her safe harbor. Bernard appeared by her side at the public hospital, unsure of what to say, offering only his silent presence, a wall against the growing loneliness. "Everything will be all right," he murmured, holding her hand, the warmth of his touch dissipating the chill that threatened to engulf her world. During those endless hours, words were unnecessary. Just being together was enough. Love manifested there, among the machines in the cold halls, when everything screamed uncertainty. When Kate's mother finally opened her eyes, relief washed over them like an unstoppable wave. The situation wouldn't change overnight, but in that fragile victory they found a truce, a moment to breathe. That afternoon, as they left the hospital, Bernard pulled her into a tight embrace, a hug that spoke more than any speech. Together, there, they would be stronger than fear and prejudice. In front of New York City, continuing its cacophony of sirens and racing hearts, they joined hands once again, knowing that greater battles awaited them, but also aware that love was the flame capable of illuminating their darkest nights. And you? Are you following this intense journey? Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from, and give us a rating from 0 to 10 for this part of the story. Your opinion is the fuel that keeps us sharing this vibrant and emotional plot. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any chapters of this adventure filled with challenges and hope. The city breathed a damp and silent dawn, broken only by the distant sound of sirens and the rustling of leaves wet from the fine drizzle that insisted on falling. Bernard and Kate walked side by side along the slippery sidewalks of Greenwich Village, enveloped by the earthy aroma of the recent rain and the subtle scent of coffee and jasmine that the breeze carried. There in the dim light of the yellowed street lamps, dilemmas, pains, and hopes aligned, marking the final stretch of the journey that had united them. The embrace in the hospital had silently etched itself in both their memories, an unspoken pact reaffirming a love forged in facing differences and adversities. Bernard broke the silence, his voice low, almost a whisper in the rhythmic cadence of the New York night. "I know the last few months have been a constant battle, but every step has been worth it," he said, gently caressing her hand, feeling the warm touch contrast with the cold air. Kate looked at him, her eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "I never imagined I could face so much, but what we have gives me strength. The company, the family, everything feels like a minefield, but being with you makes it seem possible." Bernard smiled, leaning in so their foreheads touched. "I also didn't know I could change so much. You taught me that true strength comes from love and courage." They stopped in front of a small cafe that still had its doors open during the early morning hours. The warmth inside contrasted with the cold outside and invited the necessary pause. They entered and settled at a corner table, the low murmur of the few customers providing a sense of refuge. Kate ordered a warm chocolate truffle with coffee, a remnant of childhood memories and a comfort for heavy days. Bernard ordered a short, almost bitter espresso that made his nervous system vibrate. As they waited, they looked at each other with a mix of tenderness and complicity. The chemistry. What united them was no longer just passion. It was the deep recognition of companionship, the partnership that had already overcome disapproving glances, cold speeches, and even the distance between the worlds they represented. The conversation flowed, light and unpredictable, their laughter and confidences escaping the rigidity of meetings and incessant demands. "No, have you ever thought about what our lives would be like if none of this had happened?" asked Kate, wearing the melancholic smile of those who daydream. "Perhaps less challenging, but completely dull," replied Bernard with a steady gaze and a mischievous sparkle. "What would I be without the chaos you brought?" she laughed, leaning in for a light kiss that lasted seconds but carried the promise of many more. The coffee arrived, and the sweet aroma of chocolate truffles enveloped the table, warming their bodies and souls. "You know," Kate began, lowering her voice, "all these years I grew up believing the world was a place where I didn't belong. My mother, my fears, the prejudice, but today I feel like I can be part of something greater without losing my essence." Bernard squeezed her hand tightly. "That's the most important thing, Kate. You didn't give up who you are to fit into what the world expects. You reinvented what it means to be strong and true." At that moment, the cafe door opened, and the wind brought a mix of dry leaves and promises, as if New York City itself recognized the transformation of those two. They knew then that battles would still exist, that not everyone would be ready to accept this dissonant unification of universes, but that love, tenacity, and the will to change could pave the way. Before leaving, Bernard looked into Kate's eyes and said, "What we've achieved so far is just the beginning. The world will try to bring us down, but together we are indestructible." She smiled, feeling the truth in those words. "Let's make this love a revolution," she replied. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and the city lights seemed to shine with renewed intensity, as if celebrating the courage of those who dare to transform their destinies. And you, who have been following this vivid and sincere story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, and rate this part of the plot from 0 to 10. Your opinion is essential for us to continue delivering chapters filled with emotion, realism, and inspiration. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a moment of this captivating journey that teaches us that love can indeed move mountains and break down prejudices.